The amber light of the bistro glowed against the rain-streaked window, casting a romantic haze over my nervous fidgeting. I smoothed a hand over my one good shirt, the crisp cotton feeling like a costume. Across the small, candlelit table, Elena was flawless. She wasn't just pretty, she was a living filter, softening the edges of the noisy room. She laughed, a sound like wind chimes, at my clumsy joke about a client who wanted a logo that screamed corporate trust, but in Comic Sans. Her green eyes sparkled with what I desperately wanted to believe was genuine amusement. Our online conversations over the past 3 weeks had been a delightful surprise, full of shared tastes in obscure indie films and a mutual hatred for cilantro. But in person, she was breathtaking. She leaned in as she spoke, her voice a low, honeyed murmur weaving tales of volunteering at a rescue shelter, of hiking solo through the Alps, of a life lived with passionate curiosity. I, Leo, a chronically overworked graphic designer whose most exciting recent adventure was finding a semi-functional coffee machine in the office break room, felt like I'd stumbled into a rom-com montage. After a string of dating misfires involving awkward silences and glaring incompatibility, this felt like winning the lottery. "Another Pinot Noir?" she asked, her finger tracing the stem of her nearly empty glass. The gesture was intimate, confident. "Absolutely," I nodded, perhaps too eagerly, mesmerized by the easy grace of it all. As she lifted a hand to signal the waitress, the candlelight caught the small, tasteful tattoo on the inside of her wrist, a delicate single-line drawing of a mountain peak, a perfect match to the one in her profile picture. That tiny permanent mark felt like the final seal of authenticity, proof that the vibrant woman online was truly here with me. The waitress appeared at our elbow, a stark contrast to the warm glow of our bubble. She was a woman in her late 40s, her dark hair pulled into a severe bun that emphasized the tired lines around her eyes. She moved with the weary efficiency of someone long into a double shift. Without a word, she refilled our glasses. As she set Elena's wine down, her movements were a little too quick. A small, tightly folded square of a paper napkin, seemingly caught on the edge of her tray, slipped free and landed with a soft tap squarely on my bread plate. Elena was mid-sentence describing the breathtaking, soul-cleansing silence at the summit of the Matterhorn. My eyes flicked from her animated face to the napkin. Instinct, or perhaps the sudden tension in the waitress's retreating back, made me palm it under the table. I unfolded it in my lap, hidden by the white linen tablecloth. Scrawled in frantic blue ballpoint ink, the letters dug deep into the paper, were 7 words that turned the warm wine in my stomach to ice. "She's not who you think, get out." A jolt of pure adrenaline shot through me. My head snapped up. The waitress was already halfway across the bistro, retreating behind the polished mahogany counter. She snatched up a cloth and began wiping down an already clean surface, her shoulders hunched, her gaze deliberately and fiercely avoiding mine. The romantic haze of the room shattered, replaced by a sharp, hyperreal clarity. "Everything okay, Leo?" Elena's voice cut through the sudden roar in my ears. She took a slow sip of her fresh wine, her green eyes studying me over the rim of the glass. A faint, curious smile played on her lips. "You look like you've just seen a ghost." The napkin was a live wire in my damp palm, its message burning through the paper into my skin. My mind became a frantic pinball machine of possibilities. A jealous ex-girlfriend of hers enacting some petty revenge, a cruel random prank by a bored waitress. But the woman's fear had been palpable, a sour note in the bistro's warm air. It was in the minute tremor of her hand as she poured the wine, the urgent warning dart of her eyes before she fled. That wasn't mischief, that was terror. "Fine," I managed, forcing the word through a throat that had gone tight as a drum. "Just a long day, project deadlines." I needed an anchor, something to silence the rising alarm. The tattoo, I clung to it as tangible proof, my eyes fixed on the delicate lines on her wrist. "That tattoo," I said, pointing weakly, my voice striving for casual interest. "It's beautiful, the mountain, that's the Matterhorn, right, from your solo trip." Elena's smile didn't falter, but it underwent a subtle transformation. The warm crinkling at the corners of her eyes stopped, and the expression settled into something fixed and smooth, like plaster hardening. "Oh, this old thing," she said, giving a dismissive flick of her wrist that felt oddly theatrical. "Just a silly doodle I got on a whim, really, it doesn't mean much." Her gaze shifted over my shoulder as if searching for a new topic. "So, you were saying your design project was for a tech startup? Tell me more about that." She deftly pivoted the conversation, her tone still light, but a new, insidious chill had settled in the space between us. The shift was seismic. Where her previous anecdotes about the Alps had been vivid with sensory details, the bite of the thin air, the screech of a distant marmot, they now seemed to echo hollowly in my memory like rehearsed lines from a travel brochure. My observation shifted into hyperfocus. I watched her hands, those expressive hands that had earlier painted pictures in the air. When she reached for her small leather purse, saying, I have the most adorable picture of Bruno, my shelter dog, let me show you. I saw it. Her fingers were completely bare. The realization hit me like a physical blow. In every single one of her meticulously curated profile pictures, the one at the art gallery, the one laughing on a cafe patio, the hiking shot, she had worn a distinctive silver ring set with a rough blue-green turquoise stone. She'd even mentioned it once online, calling it her lucky talisman from Santa Fe, a piece you never took off until you had to become someone else. A cold, sharp clarity cut through the fog of my panic. This wasn't a date. This was a performance. The charming volunteer, the adventurous hiker, the attentive listener, they were all roles. She was an actress and I was the mark sitting in the front row, applauding. I need to use the restroom, I said, the words coming out in an abrupt rush as I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the tile floor. Her eyes, those sparkling green eyes, tracked me with the precision of a predator. Her plaster smile held. Of course, she purred. Hurry back, I'll guard the wine. The instruction felt less like a flirtation and more like a command. My heart hammered against my ribs as I walked away from the table. Instead of turning towards the dim hallway that led to the bathrooms, I veered sharply left towards the service station, a cluttered peninsula of espresso machines and stacked ceramic cups. The waitress was there, her back to me, shoulders hunched in a posture of profound weariness as she mechanically stacked saucers. I stepped into the shadowy space beside her, my body blocking us from the dining room's view. Why did you give me that note? My voice was a low, urgent whisper. She flinched as if struck, a coffee cup rattling in her hand. She glanced past my shoulder, her eyes scanning the room before locking back on mine. Keep your voice down, she hissed, her own voice gravelly with stress. Look, I've seen her before, last month. Her hair was auburn then and her name was Claire. The guy she was with, he was about your age, dressed nice. He left this place looking like he'd won the lottery, arm around her, grinning like a king. She paused, her gaze clouding with a memory. 2 weeks later, he came back in here alone. He sat at the counter for an hour, just staring into a cold cup of coffee. He was devastated. When I asked if he was all right, he said she'd vanished after a whirlwind romance, and had cleaned out his savings account with a joint account she'd sweet-talked him into opening. She met my eyes again, her own filled with a weary, heartbreaking pity. She's a con artist, a professional, and that tattoo. She gave a short, bitter nod towards my table. It's a high-quality temporary sticker. Smudge it if you don't believe me. Now please, for your own sake, just find a way to leave. I walked back to the table on unsteady legs, the waitress's warning a frantic drumbeat in my ears. A plan formed, desperate, risky, the only one I had. I had to test the theory, to see the mask slip on my own terms. Elena was studying the dessert menu, her head tilted in a way that had seemed charming minutes ago but now looked like a calculated pose. Everything all right? She asked, her voice light and smooth as she kept her eyes on the tiramisu description. She didn't look up. It was a casual check-in, a placeholder question. I sank into my chair, letting my shoulders slump under an invisible weight. I summoned every memory of professional disappointment, every client rejection, and let that genuine distress flood my features, the tightness around my eyes, the slight downturn of my mouth. Actually no, I said, my voice deliberately ragged. I ran a hand through my hair. That was my boss on the phone. The big client account I told you about, the one with the huge annual retainer. I paused, letting the dreadful news hang. They're pulling out tonight. Some merger fallout. It's a total disaster. My biggest project, my main source of income for the next year, gone. I stared blankly at the flickering candle, the picture of shattered professional pride. I watched her, every nerve ending attuned to her reaction. The transformation was subtle but profound. The warm, sparkling focus in her green eyes, the one that had made me feel like the most interesting man in the world, dulled instantly like a switch had been flipped. The attentive empathy evaporated, replaced by a swift, cold assessment. Her gaze flicked over my face, then down to my clothes, as if reevaluating the quality of the fabric. The loss of my fictional project wasn't a personal tragedy to console, it was a depreciation of an asset. I had just plummeted in value in her internal ledger. Oh Leo, that's terrible, she cooed, the words perfectly correct but utterly hollow, like a recording. She reached across the table and patted my hand. The gesture was mechanical, a pantomime of comfort. Her skin was cool. But I'm sure something else will come along, you're so talented. Her tone was dismissive, already moving on. As if on cue, her phone buzzed softly on the table between us. She glanced at the screen, and for a split, unguarded second, the mask of concerned sympathy slipped entirely. Her brows knit in a flash of pure, impatient annoyance at the interruption, at me, at the sudden complication of a dwindling payout. Then she smoothed her expression back into placid neutrality, but the connection was irrevocably severed. The performance was over. She was mentally clocking out, the curtain about to fall. This was my moment, my only chance for definitive proof. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic counter-rhythm to the soft jazz in the bistro. "Your tattoo," I said, my voice softer now, laced with a feigned, melancholic curiosity. I reached out suddenly, my movement quicker than she expected. My thumb brushed directly across the inky lines of the mountain peak on her wrist. "It's just so incredibly detailed. The artist must have been a genius." I didn't just touch it, I applied gentle, persistent pressure, rubbing the pad of my thumb back and forth. I felt it immediately, a slight, unnatural slickness. I pulled my hand back and looked. The pad of my thumb came away with a faint, pearlescent smudge of ink and adhesive. The crisp, black edge of the tattoo had visibly lifted, a tiny, betraying curl of translucent film against her skin. Elena snatched her hand back as if scalded, cradling it to her chest. Her plaster smile shattered, replaced by a flash of raw, startled fury. Her green eyes, once sparkling, now glinted with a hard, dangerous light. "Don't!" she snapped, the honey gone from her voice, leaving only a sharp, metallic edge. The air between us, once charged with false romance, now crackled with unmasked truth. The genteel bubble of the bistro seemed to recede, leaving just the two of us in a silent, glaring standoff. I leaned forward, my own pretense gone. "Who are you?" I whispered, the words not a plea but an accusation, low and clear in the space she had just poisoned. The question hung between us, a crack in the polished veneer of the entire evening. For a long moment, Elena just stared at me, her green eyes assessing, calculating the cost of the charade. Then she let out a soft, almost imperceptible sigh. The sweet, gentle facade didn't just crack, it melted away entirely, like wax sliding off a candle, leaving behind something sharp, polished, and cold. "Someone," she said, her voice now flat and devoid of its earlier musicality, "who was having a rather profitable evening until you got a conscience from the help." She didn't elaborate, didn't offer excuses, her admission was clinical. With a brisk, efficient motion, she caught the eye of a passing busboy and signaled for the check, her movements all business. She turned her cool gaze back to me. "Don't bother with the heroics, file a report if it makes you feel better. You can't prove anything." A smudged napkin and a stranger's testimony. A thin, humorless smile touched her lips. "It's a story, not evidence." The awful truth of her words settled over me, dousing the last embers of my anger. She was right. It was my word and a ruined paper napkin against a performance, so convincing it had nearly fooled me completely. The waitress Myra appeared almost instantly, as if she'd been hovering just out of sight. She placed the leather folder on the table between us, her expression carefully neutral. Elena didn't even open it. She pulled a folded stack of bills from her purse and tossed it onto the folder, the notes fluttering down without grace. "Keep the change," she said, her eyes locking onto Myra's. The venom was unmistakable, a silent promise of recognition. "For your excellent service." She stood, smoothing her dress in one fluid motion. She gave me one last look, not of anger but of pure dismissive assessment, as if I were a flawed product she was returning. "Better luck next time, Leo." And then she was walking away, her heels clicking a sharp, final rhythm on the tile floor. She pushed through the bistro door and was swallowed whole by the rainy, indifferent night, a phantom dissolving into the mist. I sat there, motionless, a profound tremor running through my hands. It wasn't just shock, it was the violent release of adrenaline mixed with a staggering wave of relief so potent it felt like weakness. The bubble of the perfect date was gone and the real, slightly shabby world rushed back in. Myra returned to the table, beginning to clear Elena's side with quiet efficiency. She picked up the untouched wine glass, the lipstick mark a perfect crimson crescent. "You okay?" she asked, her voice low, not looking at me directly. "Thanks to you," I said, my own voice raw, scraped thin by the ordeal. "I'm Leo." "Myra," she said again, finally meeting my eyes and offering a small, weary smile that reached them this time, softening the lines of fatigue. "I'm sorry you had to go through that, truly. I saw the look on your face when you came in, hopeful. I couldn't watch it get stolen again." She gestured with a plate towards the door. "She's good. She picks her moments, her targets. You were smart to listen." I fumbled for my wallet, paid my half of the bill, and left a massive tip on top of Elena's cash, a thank you written in currency. As I stood to leave, my coat in hand, I hesitated. The thought of going home to my empty, quiet apartment felt unbearable. I turned back to her. "Can I buy you a coffee after your shift?" The words tumbled out. "I know it's unconventional, but I feel like I owe you more than just a tip. At least let me say a proper thank you." Myra paused, a stack of dishes in her hands. She looked at me, really looked, her gaze traveling over my face, assessing my sincerity. She saw the residual shock, the unguarded gratitude, the complete absence of the slick pretense that had just left the building. The severe bun at the nape of her neck couldn't hide the inherent kindness in the curve of her cheek, the gentle concern in her brown eyes. A genuine, warmer smile broke through her professional reserve. "You know what?" she said, setting the dishes down with a decisive clink. She reached behind her back and began untying the strings of her black apron. "My shift was actually over 20 minutes ago. I was just finishing up the side work." She pulled the apron off, revealing a simple, comfortable sweater. "Let me grab my coat from the back. I know a place around the corner that does real hot chocolate, thick Belgian with actual chocolate shavings. No rain clouds allowed." A minute later, we stepped out together under the awning and then into the cool, cleansing rain. The door of the bistro shut firmly behind us, sealing the disaster of the blind date firmly in the past. Ahead, the city lights shimmered on wet pavement, leading to a warm glow from a cafe window, the promise of a genuine conversation with no scripts and the quiet, unexpected beginning of something new.